For the vast majority of human history, a spoken word was the most fragile thing in the world. The moment a sound left your lips, it vanished into the air, completely unrecoverable. We learned to paint landscapes, we learned to carve stone, and we learned to write words on paper. We could preserve the thoughts of our ancestors, but we could never, ever hear their voices. Sound was a ghost. Until we learned how to carve it. If you were to walk into a large, bustling corporate office in the early 1910s, you would notice a very distinct, heavily orchestrated atmosphere. In the private wood-paneled offices, executives paced back and forth, speaking not to other human beings but into long, hollow acoustic tubes attached to heavy iron machines. Down the hall, in large, open rooms, dozens of female typists sat in rigid concentration. They wore what looked like medical stethoscopes in their ears. The only sound in that room was the deafening, rhythmic clatter of 50 heavy typewriter carriages moving in unison. There were no electronic microphones, there were no magnetic tape reels, there were no glowing screens. There was only the quiet, physical, mechanical magic of the wax cylinder dictation machine. This is the story of how the modern world first captured the ephemeral human voice, turned it into a physical object, and built an entire silent industry around it. To understand the absolute miracle of this technology, we have to go back to the very beginning of recorded sound. In 1877, Thomas Edison managed to record a human voice for the first time in history. He did it by wrapping a piece of delicate tinfoil around a grooved metal cylinder. When he spoke into a mouthpiece, the sound waves vibrated a diaphragm, which pushed a metal stylus into the foil, indenting his voice onto the metal. It was a profound breakthrough, but tinfoil was a terrible medium. It was harsh, it tore easily, and after playing it back just a few times, the indentations smoothed out, and the voice was gone forever. The ghost had escaped again. The true leap forward came nearly a decade later, in 1886, from the Volta Laboratory, led by Alexander Graham Bell, Chichester Bell, and Charles Tainter. They realized that to truly capture the subtle, warm nuances of the human voice, you couldn't just dent a piece of metal. You had to physically carve the sound. They abandoned the tinfoil and introduced a new medium, the wax cylinder. Shortly after, Edison returned to the field and introduced solid wax cylinders. The era of the acoustic mechanical recording had truly begun. The mechanics of these early dictation machines, often known by brand names like the Dictaphone or the Ediphone, were entirely reliant on the physical power of the human breath. When a manager sat at his desk to dictate a letter, he spoke directly into a large speaking horn or a glass mouthpiece. He had to speak clearly, with force. His voice traveled down the tube and struck a highly sensitive glass or mic at diaphragm. As the sound waves hit the diaphragm, it vibrated in exact proportion to the frequencies of his voice. Attached to the center of this vibrating diaphragm was a microscopic, incredibly sharp stylus, usually made from a sapphire. Beneath this vibrating sapphire needle, a brown soap wax cylinder rotated steadily, powered by a heavy spring motor or a primitive electric motor. As the needle bounced up and down, it carved a continuous, microscopic, spiraling trench into the wax. Unlike the lateral, side-to-side grooves of later vinyl records, these dictation machines used a vertical cut, often called the Hill and Dale method. The sapphire carved tiny hills and deep valleys into the wax. A loud, booming word would carve a deep trench. A soft whisper would carve a shallow one. The executive was quite literally transforming the invisible weight of his breath into a three-dimensional landscape on a piece of wax. Once the dictation was finished, the cylinder was carefully removed. It felt surprisingly heavy in the hand, solid and smooth, yet containing thousands of words trapped in its microscopic grooves. It was placed on a wooden rack, waiting to be transported to the typing pool. This transition from the executive's desk to the typist's desk created a completely new human routine in the corporate world. In the typing pool, a stenographer would take the carved cylinder and gently slide it onto the mandrel of a transcribing machine. But she did not listen to the voice through a loudspeaker. Loudspeakers would have created absolute chaos in a room full of typists. Instead, she wore a pair of acoustic listening tubes. They looked remarkably similar to a doctor's stethoscope, gently resting in her ears, connected by hollow rubber hoses directly to the reproducer head of the machine. The playback process was the exact reverse of the recording. A softer, blunt sapphire needle tracked the hills and valleys of the wax, vibrating a diaphragm which pushed the sound waves directly up the rubber tubes and into the typist's ears. It was an incredibly intimate experience. She heard the breathing, the pauses, and the exact intonation of a voice that was recorded hours or days ago, echoing directly inside her head. But transcribing a voice in real time requires immense physical coordination. A typist needed her hands entirely free to operate the heavy mechanical keys of her typewriter. She couldn't constantly reach over to turn the wax cylinder on and off. The brilliant solution was the pneumatic foot pedal. Beneath her desk, resting on the floor, was a mechanical or air-driven pedal. When she pressed her foot down, the cylinder would begin to spin and the voice would flow into her ears. When she lifted her foot, the cylinder stopped instantly. If she missed a word, she could tap a different section of the pedal to backspace the needle a few grooves, repeating the sentence. It was a quiet, rhythmic dance. The press of a foot, the listening ear, and the frantic, explosive typing of hands. Over and over, 8 hours a day, transforming the carved wax back into written ink. However, in a busy office, buying a brand new wax cylinder for every single letter would have been an astronomical expense. The manufacturers knew this, and so they designed one of the most fascinating mechanical life cycles in the history of office equipment: the shaving machine. The solid wax cylinders were thick, often 1/4 of an inch of solid material. When a typist finished transcribing a cylinder, the voice on it was no longer needed. The cylinder was taken to a dedicated shaving machine, which was sometimes a standalone heavy iron device, or an attachment built right into the phonograph. The used cylinder was placed on a rapidly spinning axis. A hardened sapphire or glass shaving knife was carefully lowered onto the surface. As the cylinder spun at high speed, the knife peeled away an impossibly thin layer of the wax, just a few thousandths of an inch thick. The microscopic hills and valleys containing the voices of yesterday were simply shaved off, falling as fine, white dust into a collection drawer below. The surface was left perfectly smooth, glossy, and blank, ready to be carved all over again. A single thick cylinder could be shaved and reused 75 to 100 times before the wax wall became too thin and fragile to support the needle. There is something deeply philosophical about the shaving machine. It was a mechanical manifestation of forgetting. Every day, millions of spoken words, urgent letters, and emotional inflections were physically scraped out of existence in the name of business efficiency, leaving behind only the paper transcripts as proof they were ever spoken. For over half a century, this was how the world managed its spoken words. The wax cylinder dictation machine survived through 2 world wars, quietly sitting on mahogany desks and in noisy typing pools. But wax, by its very nature, is a fragile thing. It can crack if dropped. It can melt if left in a hot room. It requires heavy, complex machinery to record and shave. As the 1940s approached, the invisible forces of electronics began to change the landscape. The Second World War accelerated the development of magnetic wire recording, capturing sound invisibly on a hair-thin spool of steel wire. Then, in 1947, the Dictaphone company introduced the Dictabelt. It was a flexible, thin loop of bright red or blue plastic. It was cheap, it was practically unbreakable, and you could fold it up and mail it in a standard envelope. The heavy, breakable wax cylinders became obsolete almost overnight. By the 1950s, magnetic tape recorders entered the market, and the era of physical acoustic carbon came to a quiet, definitive end. Today, the dictation machines of the early 20th century are mostly museum pieces, heavy blocks of iron and brass sitting silently behind glass. We record our voices now on invisible digital chips, capturing hours of pristine audio with 0 physical weight. But if you visit the deep, climate-controlled vaults of the Library of Congress or university archives, you will find thousands of these old brown wax cylinders stored carefully in cardboard tubes. Many of them were never shaved. They hold the voices of executives, politicians, ethnographers, and ordinary people from over a century ago. The hills and valleys are still there, perfectly preserved in the delicate wax. They are silent ghosts, waiting patiently in the dark, holding on to the physical weight of a breath, waiting for a needle to wake them up.